I'm Emily. Thank you to our friends at Ethicode for putting together this beautiful day today. I am excited to talk to you about responsible innovation in AI. And I also just want to point out that while I do focus on AI for a lot of this talk, a lot of this information can be applied to many different types of innovation. And I'm curious, before we start, how many folks in this room identify as non-engineers? Do we have any not software developers in the room? Okay, I thought that was actually kind of interesting because people were waiting to look around first and then identify. And so good, I'm excited you're here. I am also not an engineer, excited to raise my hand there. I'll tell you a little bit more about my background in a few slides, but hopefully everyone can get something out of this talk. But I really like to think about responsible AI and responsible innovation in terms of something that's much larger than a technical challenge. We all can play a hand in responsible innovation, and it's a shared project, right? We have our engineers involved, we have the policy team involved, ethics teams, on and on and on. We're all here to do a good job and shape the future of AI. So today, this is essentially what we'll talk about. I want to define responsibility and then talk you through my 5 pillars. It's been weeks of me trying to come up with a better word than pillars because I felt like that sounds a little like hoity-toity. So if anyone has any advice after the talk, I'd love to hear it. And then we'll share some examples of folks that maybe didn't do a great job and some folks that did. So just generally, I know you know what I look like, but I like to share a photo of myself because then you get to see my chicken. This is Frances. I am a non-engineer, as I mentioned. I have worked at several different startups across several different industries. The thread throughout all of that is that I am people obsessed. So I got my start at Hugging Face working very specifically on diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging. For anyone that works in the AI or the machine learning space knows that this is quite a challenge. And my role has since expanded to be much more of an employee experience, culture, recruiting type role. And I get to give talks like this to awesome people like you, which is exciting. And in case anybody is not familiar with Hugging Face, this is our logo. You will now never forget that that's the name of this emoji. We are an open source platform where people build and share AI tools together. Are folks familiar with Hugging Face? Have people used Hugging Face in the past? I see some shaking and some hands raising. Great. I swear I will not focus all of my examples on Hugging Face, but we will pop up every now and again, because we are doing a good job at some things. So I would like to share that. I also do want to point out before we begin that Hugging Face is fully decentralized, which frankly, when I started at Hugging Face, I didn't have a great understanding for what that actually meant. But in short, it means that every employee at the company is a leader. Our CEO does not set goals for the company that then cascade down through each of the teams. It actually is sort of flipped on its head. And each one of our employees is responsible for setting their own goals, oftentimes even for coming up with their own projects that they believe will be impactful. And our CEO's job is to sell the company. And I think that that's just important to point out as we get into some of the examples that we will see moving forward, because decisions, contributions, and innovation really happen at a faster pace across this global community because there's no single leadership chain. So, responsibility. I was hoping to be able to give you a quick, easy definition, but I can't. So we're going to talk about the 5 things that I think make up responsible innovation. So the first one is ethics. So the question of ethics is not what can we do with this technology, but it's what should we do with this technology? Right. So as we've seen over the last 10 years in our own lived experiences, technology moves faster than the law. Ethics helps to fill that gap while regulation catches up. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this bias bullet point in a couple of slides, but oftentimes people talk about how bias is a data problem. I want to expand that a little bit. While that is absolutely true, it's also a moral one because people make decisions about who gets represented in the data and who gets excluded or harmed. And then again, non-engineers bring perspectives like psychology, policy, and design to responsible innovation that helps to, keep AI aligned with our human needs. And we need AI literacy in order to make sure that happens. So I want to ground each one of my pillars, again, think of a better word, in a academic or grounding principle. So the first one I'll start with is, this is one of the first papers that came out really talking about what responsible AI could look like. So Floridian Cowles in 2019, created the 5 principles of AI ethics. I do think it's important to go through them fairly quickly. I'm throwing a bunch of words at you, but I think that some of these should be pretty straightforward. And I swear I didn't just copy my 5 pillars off of the fact that they used 5 principles. So the first one is beneficence, which has been very difficult for me to say. Did I say that properly? Beneficence? Thank you. I see people shaking their heads. AI should essentially do good, right? We're trying to do good with our innovation. And it should also not do bad, right? These are fairly straightforward. Non-malfeasance is, I think, the correct way to say that. Also, we should be supporting human agency, not working to replace it. And then we also have justice. So we promote fairness and avoid discrimination. And then explicability, right? We want to be transparent about what we've created and how we've created it and why we've created it and all of those things. I want to take a step back to the non-malfeasance piece really quickly and point out that there is an environmental aspect here that I'm sure everybody in this room is aware of, right? Sustainability falls under ethical responsibility, and I want to include a nod to my climate researchers and folks who are focused on the impacts of AI in our environment. I am not an expert in this space and won't touch on it too much more for the rest of this conversation, but want to just make sure that I acknowledge this is a huge issue. And doing good means designing AI that's not just good for people, it's also good for the planet. So thank you to folks who are focused in that space. Okay, let's talk about ethics going wrong. I don't know if folks can remember this, but DHH is David Heinemeier Hansson and Steve Wozniacki, who helped create Apple, had this conversation about an Apple card that they both applied for back in 2019. I have an Apple card. I'm sure people in this room have Apple cards. Back when these 2 men signed up for an Apple card and also signed their wives up, they got much, 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 much higher credit limits than their wives did. And they also have giant social media followings. And so people noticed pretty quickly. Unfortunately, the way that Apple responded was to say, it's not our fault. Goldman Sachs issues the cards. It's not us. We don't know what's going on. And their response was pretty limited and also confusing because they didn't take any responsibility. The card was branded as theirs, but they completely deflected and drew a lot of criticism about it. The New York financial services actually investigated Goldman Sachs and the Apple card, eventually deciding that there was gender wasn't an explicit input in their data. That was incredibly opaque. They weren't answering any questions about it, all of those things. But they could tell that the algorithm, the quote unquote algorithm, was encoding gender biases through proxies like income patterns, employment histories, spending behaviors, which all led to disparate outcomes, right? Imagine your wife goes on parental leave for a year, spending habits change, income habits change, all of a sudden your credit limit is much lower, even though you didn't encode gender into your data set. And if no one can explain how a decision that harms people became to be, it's not good, right? That's malfeasance. So in the end, there were actually no charges pressed against Apple or Goldman Sachs, but they added manual review processes for contested cases because, as that tweet saw, maybe it's not included there, but essentially they tried to get customer service and didn't get any. They increased the transparency for their credit decisioning, and they said that they conducted internal reviews, right? Not great. So I said I'd circle back around to data a little bit. It's a human problem. It's not just an engineering problem. People think if we fix the data set, we'll fix the bias, but bias exists because we humans decide what to collect. We decide what labels to apply, what counts as normal, and who is considered the user. So bias isn't just about messy or missing data. It's about who shaped the data in the first place. So let's talk about some data biases real quick. They sort of go in order from like the creation of data to when it's completed. So it starts with intent, right? What problem are we solving with our data? Essentially, you have to ask, who is this data accurate for? Or whose values is this data in line with? And then when we talk about representation, we talk about who's visible in our data and who's invisible in our data. And then lastly, we talk about the impact, right? We've answered those questions. That way we should know who is being impacted, right? What are the real world impacts, like the Apple Card example, right? Folks were getting much lower credit limits. People get denied loans. People get misidentified. All of those big, scary topics that we talk about. So, Hugging Face, what do we do well? We talk a lot about making sure that everything has a bias, right? As we know, we're all human. We all have some biases. And so we use model cards, I'll show you an example in a second, to bring those biases to the surface so that we're not hiding behind opaque data. We also have inclusive data sets that align with those, some of those, the 5 examples from Floridi and Coles, to reduce some bias when it comes to Western English language, like what I speak. And then we also focus on smaller models and things that will actually bring down, hopefully, the environmental cost of AI. If anyone is familiar with Bloom, this was a project that we started back in 2021 with thousands of volunteer researchers around the world. It is a large language model that can output text in 46 languages and 13 programming languages. It was a big science collaboration, and it was a fully global project that was essentially the first multi-language open source large language model built in the public for people. These examples here are just, I pulled directly from its model card on the Hugging Face website. And so you can see that we have pulled out information, right, that you can see even before you start using it, right? You know who created it, you know who funded it, which I also think is very important. And then you can see behind the scenes a little bit, check out the infrastructure, and learn a little bit more about the training data. You can also see how we recommend that you use the model, as well as ways that we recommend you maybe don't use the model, where it might not be applicable. And then we also highlight some risks and limitations. That list is longer, but I just included a couple there. I pulled out a few of these examples because I also think it's important to show that, hopefully no offense to anyone sitting in this room, but these model cards weren't written by engineers, right? This isn't the engineer's job. This is, of course, they were helped along by the engineers, but we need other folks to translate this content into understandable and digestible and applicable guidelines on the model cards. So that brings us to how ethics doesn't just live in the engineering department, shaped by lots of people. So the UX researcher makes people visible. Policy advisor, like I just said, turns policy into practice. People who do the hiring are creating teams that have certain values. And the communications decides how we talk about our innovations. So we'll move on to the next pillar now. If ethics is about intent, then governance is about accountability. So again, who decides and how? Essentially, government, is the system of rules, roles, and accountability that ensures that AI is used responsibly. The accountability is someone must own the decisions, like Apple didn't, not just the algorithm. Rules clarify how the models are trained, evaluated, and used. And then this decentralized governance, like at Hugging Face, means sharing decision power within the community. And we end up with an equity of voice. So open source in general is, I think, a good framework for good governance because there's transparency, there's accountability, and there's participation. I think that's fairly straightforward, especially if folks have been involved in open source projects in the past. It works because people can see how things are made and hold each other accountable for what they change, and then also actively take part in what's coming next, like we do. Are there any Americans in the room? I'm curious. A couple of hands? Okay, so folks, the Americans may be familiar with this example, but this is pretty recent. In 2024, there were a couple of changes that were made to essentially like legal aid in New York City. And so the government decided to launch a chatbot without doing a lot of what we talked about already. And then there's a mayor of New York City who's essentially a joke. If anyone is familiar with Eric Adams, I would recommend just looking up like one or two things about him. When reporters asked about it, he doubled down, essentially, and he said, mistakes are just what happens when you innovate. And they kept this up. So you can see just a couple of these examples makes it really, really clear who we are discriminating against, right? Who is invisible in these examples? We're taking away tips, which in the United States is what makes servers, waitresses, baristas, that's what makes their job have a livable wage. I was a bartender for many years. I made $4 an hour on my paycheck. And the top two are, I think, even more egregious. Section 8 is someone who gets rental assistance from the government. And so these examples are saying you can actually turn people away who are getting assistance in order to have a home. But again, it's just what happens when you innovate. So, like always, here's a couple of examples of how good governance happens every day, including how it didn't happen in that chatbot. We need legal folks to review the answers that a chatbot might give, which clearly did not happen in the New York example. We need folks who understand the policy to review what the output might be. And then we need to build systems for how we might fix it if something goes wrong. And community manager, customer experience folks will be able to actually give feedback pretty quickly so that you know, oh no, something's going wrong. Let's turn this off for a minute, fix it, and bring it back online. It is still active to this day in that form, in case anyone wants to give it a quick Google. Even if we have good governance, we're going to get to the third pillar now, and that's where risk shows up. We need to anticipate harm before it happens. I wrote a note about this. I'm not sure where I put it, but I was at dinner last night with some folks from ethicode and some of the speakers, which was lovely. And we were laughing because one of the conversations turned to risk management. We might have been bouncing off the AWS outage a little bit. We were talking about how hope is not a strong pillar of risk management, which made me laugh because I think we've probably all worked for companies where like we were just really hopeful that everything would be okay. So let's talk a little bit more intensively about what risk is. So what could go wrong and who bears the cost? I just saw the sign of the cross happen in the audience. So risk management in AI mitigates potential harms, uncertainties, and unintended consequences. It's about anticipating outcomes, right? Not just responding after the fact. Anticipation is cheaper if you need to tell your boss something, right? That might help. Especially cheaper than a bias scandal, for example. And different risks require different responses, and you don't want to lose that public's trust, right? So risk is super important. The European Union has a risk pyramid where they've actually assigned 5 different levels of risk. At the bottom, that's usually things like like almost like customer service chatbots or places where you have easy human intervention that are essentially permitted with no restrictions. And as you go up the pyramid, you can see that they get more and more restrictive. Just very quickly, the top like unacceptable risk generally boils down to AI systems that do social scoring. I'm not sure how familiar everybody in the room is with that term, but it's essentially assigning people a number based on their like trustworthiness, or like what the system defines your trustworthiness as, essentially based on your behavior, your purchases, your social activity. It's usually used to like grant or restrict access and is like a pretty dangerous topic of conversation. So the EU has decided that that is unacceptable. And then just the high-risk categories are a couple of the things that we've talked about already, right? Like credit limits. It's where things can like significantly affect your safety or your rights, and algorithms for hiring or college admissions. Anything that can really impact your life falls in the fourth category. I'll give a quick example from the United States. I'm embarrassed, and everybody knows that our incarceration rate is very high. And this is a picture of two inmates who I believe were in South Carolina, but Bernard Parker is on the left and Dylan Fugit was on the right. And some states in the United States have used and still use a program called Compass. And I feel like just looking at this photo, you can maybe guess what the topic is that I'm about to talk about. But Compass is Correctional Offender Management Profiling for Alternative Sanctions. I know we love our acronyms in engineering. That's a bad one, right? That did not need to be shoehorned in there. And so essentially it was used to predict how we think somebody might reoffend or not reoffend. I think we lost a little of this slide in the Google to PowerPoint transition, but what that essentially says is that Bernard Parker on the left was assigned a number that made it look like he was very likely to reoffend, and so he did not get parole. And then when he eventually did get parole several years later, he, to this day, has not reoffended. The opposite was true for our friend Dylan on the right, who was paroled and immediately reoffended. And so what we found was that was the pattern. White folks were labeled as low risk. Non-white folks were labeled as high risk. Probably not hugely surprising, but obviously hugely problematic. And it was opaque. You couldn't argue with it because you couldn't see the data. So who's doing it a little bit better? Hugging Face. We do risk management through openness, right? I'm sort of like harping on this point a little bit, but we treat risk as a feedback loop. Everything is open. Everything is accessible. Even our internal communications are fully open. On Slack, you're actually not supposed to. It's not closed, but you're not supposed to direct message anyone. All of our conversations through our like company policy are meant to happen in public channels. That way, anyone can chime in about something they think is important. And so we just have this very open culture in order to mitigate risk, because if you in the back corner over there are going to recognize something that I'm not, we want to hear about it, and we want to hear about it early and quickly. And we'll talk more about OpenAI later, that they're also on the good and bad side. But Lillian Wang, if folks aren't fully familiar with her, you should look her up. She's awesome. She's the head of their preparedness team. She came up with some of the earliest like sort of policies and procedures at OpenAI to mitigate risk. And they actually have a centralized risk governance strategy, which is the opposite of Hugging Faces, but I think they still do really good work. Both of them make risk everyone's responsibility, whether that's the community, like flagging issues, or a dedicated team that just tests edge cases. Both strategies are concerned with risk, which I think is great. So again, who do we think is on this slide? Besides engineers, obviously. We've got legal, very important, always. We've also got design. Whenever I think about design and how they test how real people use and misuse systems, does this pop into anybody's head? The video of the woman who was QAing a fake program with that kid's toy, putting the blocks in the different shapes, and said, okay, that's a square, put it in the square, and it fit in the circle. So it went in the circle. On and on and on and on. So we need real people testing these systems because they're going to misuse them. Diversity folks, or folks that even thought about diversity before, can surface patterns of inequity and disproportionate impact. Super important. And then also mentioned this earlier, but customer support folks can spot early warning signs and mitigate some of this harm in the wild. I mentioned earlier that I'm a people person. I'm going to try to not spend too long on this section, but my next pillar is essentially human impact. And so it's my favorite. We'll try to get through it quickly because responsible innovation exists through all of us every day. And I'm going to start with a real silly example, which is how many chicken nuggets do you think you could eat? So my friend in the sound booth asked if I wanted to replay that video over and over, and I was like, I think once is enough. But what I really like about it is a couple of years ago, McDonald's, it may have happened here too, but they tried to take away their drive-through people and replace them with an audio AI system. And this group of people, and it's just their laughs, like we've all laughed like that, and it's just like uncontrollable and you could feel it. They could not get the machine to stop adding chicken nuggets to their order. By the time a human showed up, they had like 18,000 chicken nuggets in their order. And I love the humanity that it shows, right? Like clearly there's a disconnect between the system and the human experience. So, and it's joyful, which I really like. But a good example of how these systems exist in real life, right? So when we talk about human impact, who is affected and how do we repair harm? I'll talk about repairing harm a lot. I think that, we talked about most of these bullet points already, but the question, again, sort of similar to ethics, is not just can we build it, but does this contribute to the world that we actually want to live in? Do I want to eat 1,800 chicken nuggets today? Sort of unclear. I could probably do 1,400. So we'll talk about accountability. The AI Now Institute wrote this paper about accountability in practice. I think it's maybe not worth going into too much detail here, but if folks are interested, I would recommend looking it up. It's essentially challenging the idea that we can fix systems with like technical audits alone, right? We need more of a structural change. We can't just decide that something has bias. We have to do something about that bias. It needs to be built into laws and have enforceable consequences. The core idea is that responsibility is not really about patching bias after the fact. It's about designing systems where if there's bias, if there's harm created, there's real consequences. And then are folks familiar with the concept of restorative justice at all? It's really fascinating. And while I was coming up with the next couple of slides, I realized that I should maybe focus my next talk on restorative AI ethics and restorative justice because it's really, truly wonderful. And I also recommend digging in a little bit deeper if this is something that you're excited about. As a quick personal restorative justice example, the company that I worked for back in 2020 in the US was the height of our Black Lives Matters protests, and it was a highly politically charged environment. And the company I work for decided to have some open conversations about what was happening in the world at that time, which I don't think is a bad idea. I'm not sure they did it very well. There was no moderator, and the conversation was just fully open, which meant that one of those conversations got fairly heated, as you might expect. A colleague said something inappropriate, and that colleague was immediately terminated. I swear within the hour, that colleague was immediately terminated. And many of us were really disappointed, like not because we agreed with what he said, but because there was no attempt at a conversation or no attempt at repair. And so the most dangerous thing about that is that all of a sudden the thing that he said could become even truer to him, right? Like, oh, obviously this is like, I'm going to get fired for saying this? Like, of course I'm right. And so that moment really stayed with me because it showed how quickly we moved to punishment instead of understanding or conversation. And sometimes that happens in AI too. Like instead of focusing on compliance or crisis management, we should be talking about how do we repair relationships and rebuild trust. I just think it's a really interesting topic of conversation. And so here are a couple of examples of people doing some restorative AI work. This paper is one that I would fully endorse. And if you're interested, I would recommend reading it. It's pretty brand new. And I just want to quickly shout out Denmark. You have a law proposed at the moment, which I think is actually pretty cool. I don't know how exactly it will work, so don't ask me. But essentially, individuals will be given essentially copyright ownership over their likeness and their voice and their image. And if someone uses it inappropriately, you have actual legal recourse, whether you get it removed, whether you get paid a little bit. It's kind of neat because Denmark is not just saying, let's stop deepfakes. Denmark is saying, it's your voice, it's your likeness, it's your humanity, and it's being used without your consent. You have the right to reclaim it. It's actually a very human-centric law. It's a shift from prevention to repair. We know that this will happen, so how do we restore it when it does? And I mean, I'll say it again because I think it's important. It's an acknowledgement that your identity is not just data, right? Your identity is you, it's your personhood. And so I will be curious to see how that plays out here in Denmark. So this is sort of a good segue into where it can go wrong. I feel like we're all pretty familiar with the fact that sometimes models can suck up artistic work, written work, things that have not provided their consent. And then all of a sudden we see these models recreate some distinctive styles, and it's not a great situation for that artist where this is their livelihood. So consent and credit are core to being creative. And obviously this is where the trust might break down for creative folks. And then the other example of like removing humanity that I have is sort of this gig economy, like Uber Eats, or I guess any sort of rideshare app, all have these like closed systems where they assign work to people based on data that we have no idea. We're literally just making guesses. Sometimes it has to do with people taking breaks. Sometimes it has to do with how fast they do deliveries. What we know is that there's no human manager, right? It's essentially an algorithm that's deciding what work you get and why you get that work. And it just sort of makes the human part of it invisible, right? We're relying on this algorithm that no one can see to allow me to make money is not caring for people. Couple of very quick examples of things going right, except I do have to call out that spawning is currently offline, so I apologize. They have a tool. It was so popular, it became so popular so quickly that they had to pull it down because it was overrunning their servers. But essentially they had a tool that said, have I been trained? So artists could put in their artwork and see if it had actually been sucked up into any large language models. Hopefully it will be back very soon. Mozilla does really good work in this space, right? They've asked for volunteers around the world to represent voices that we don't normally see in AI models, right? Voices, accents, those sorts of things. AI that learns from the people. And then we also have a partnership on AI that's working to protect folks who are sort of unseen in building these systems, like data labelers, content moderators, those folks who get excluded or don't get access to the psychological treatment, even though they're looking at some traumatic information. All of these objectives center human rights. Just like always, I've spent too much time on the human impact section, but I think that this is clear to you folks by now that we are looking at more than engineers. So the last bit is openness. And I will bring us to the OECD core principles that just fully promote transparency and accessibility in AI systems. If you are doing open source work, you are essentially already being transparent, which is great. UNESCO said something similar when it defined AI literacy as a public good, which I think is really fascinating because if you don't understand AI, you're not going to be able to have a voice in it. I'm sure we've all had conversations with people in our lives where you tell them that you work in AI and the reaction is, oh, AI is going to ruin the world, because that's the only conversation they've ever had about it. So I think the more we can increase AI literacy, the more we can achieve responsible innovation. OpenAI, I said we'd get back to it. Not so open anymore, right? They used to be open source. They realized they could make a little bit more money if they closed things down. And, they're doing great work. It's just not so transparent anymore. And then Lion ran into a problem with having open data, which is great. That's what I've been advocating for the whole time. But their data set contained copyrighted images. It even contained people's medical images, which was kind of crazy. But we need consent in order for this to work also. We are an open source company. We provide transparency, participatory development, and community literacy and education. Anyone who's doing open source work, you are also working toward this goal, and I really thank you for it. I do think it's really important. The thing that we're not doing well, I said I would get to it, is that this is our website. What is this? I remember telling my dad that I was going to go work for a place called Hugging Face and then tell him to go to the website, and this is what my dad sees. He's a smart guy. He's like, all right, I hope they pay you. This is the bottom of the website. If you are not an engineer, sometimes if you are an engineer, this is gobbledygook, right? We are not making ourselves available to people who would be interested in doing good work just by the fact that this is a fairly opaque and meaningless website. You can tell my boss I said that. So again, a lot of this openness section is actually focused on AI literacy because I'm so mad about our website. But we need people who can actually translate very technical terms and details into human language. That's sort of the bottom line. So responsible AI is cultural, right? We all have a piece, we all have a part to play, and it's how we keep the future human. And if you remember nothing else from today, remember that it's not about perfection. I hope you can take bits and pieces from what we talked about and apply it in your work, because it's just about being a participant. It's just about being involved. Thank you.